I was in heaven, enveloped in and next to the voice who spoke to me and said, "In the way that I love you now know I have always loved you, with an infinity of love beyond human capacity for understanding, beyond my ability of my brain to know. I am the oneness of love," it said, "and you are my beloved being. And every single of the 7 billion human beings you see now, and I could see every 7 billion people individually, all of them, all like a hologram on the earth, doing everything they were doing in the moment of the time of the universe when I was looking. And they were all covered by a veil. And the veil was forgetfulness. The veil was the universe itself, part and parcel of the entire structure of all things, including the human brain and perception of the world in which they live. And all are blind to me. But you know now you are not blind to me here, and none will be lost to me. None are ever lost to me, because each is my beloved. In the way that I love you, in this particular way of my creating you, I know you, I love you, I love each the same.
Now, before I did hospice and bereavement, I really didn't have any beliefs about afterlife. But after 19 years of working with the dying, it's very clear to me that there is life after this life.
As a culture, we believe that death is the end of everything, that it's the scariest thing we'll ever experience while we're here in human form. And I guess if you don't hear anything from me, I want you to know that it's so magnificent on the other side. It's such a joy to be on the other side. And that from here, it's a graduation. It's not an ending. It's a continuation in your soul's evolution. It's a moving into new and more uplifting adventures. It's not a loss of anything. And your energy continues on.
Your life consists of much more than you realized. And I thought, what a shame I hadn't known that earlier. Now it's over.
The near-death experience isn't given just to those who have the experience. It's given to all of us to learn from, because all of us can profit by the lessons that near-death experiences learn in the course of the life review or other aspects of their experience, and we can grow from these lessons, and we can apply these lessons into our daily life.
The patients say that these later steps of the near-death experience are absolutely ineffable. That means indescribable. And that try as they may, they can't find any words in the ordinary language that we are exposed to describe the amazing feelings and experiences they are going through at this point.
Beautiful beyond words.
Absolutely. And they say they become aware of what's described as a tunnel, a passageway, a portal, and they go into this tunnel, and when they come out into a very brilliant, warm, loving, and accepting light. And people at this point describe just amazing feelings of peace and comfort. In this light, they say that relatives or friends of theirs who seem already to have died, who have already died, and have seem to be there to meet them and to greet them and to help them through this transition. Another thing they'll often tell us is that at this point they are met by some religious figure Christians say Christ, Jews say God or an angel, and they say in this setting that this being in effect asked them a question. And they all say that words can't convey it, that communication in this position does not take place through words as you and I are now using, but rather in the form of an immediate awareness. And the way they summarize this question or try to put it into words is that they say that he asked in effect, what have you done with your life? How have you learned to love? And at this point they say they undergo a detailed review of everything they have ever done in their lives. This is displayed around them, they'll tell us, in the form of a full-color, three-dimensional panorama. And it involves every detail of their life, they say, from the point of their birth right up to the point of this close call with death.
And it might take only a matter of seconds in our time.
Absolutely, Jeffrey. And you know, the people who go through this say that time, as you and I are experiencing it now, that's measured by the clock, is not a factor in these experiences.
It's as if they're in a realm which has transcended time as we know it.
Right. Many of them say eternity as the word they will grasp at to explain this. Interestingly enough, during this life review, the patients very often report that they review the events of their lives not from the perspective they have when they went through the event, but rather from a third-person perspective, and that their perspective is displaced out to the side or above, and they watch themselves go through these life actions from a third-person perspective, from which, incidentally, they can also empathetically relate to the people with whom they've interacted.
In other words, if some of their actions have caused pain in another person, they feel that pain.
Absolutely. They take the perspective of the person that they have been unkind to. And accordingly, if they see an action where they have been loving to someone, then they can feel the warmth and good feelings that that has resulted in the life of this person.
And again, I have a chapter of this in Lessons from the Light. We've recently done research on people who are blind. And even those who are blind from birth can report classic near-death experiences and sometimes also describe being able to be aware of objects in their physical environment which can be independently confirmed by external witnesses. So it's data like these, among others, that suggest that whatever this experience it isn't merely something that people are imagining or dreaming or making up. We don't have any scientific explanation for it, at least from conventional science, but these facts and these observations are reported over and over again, so that science is going to have to take them into account one way or another.
We now have a series that we're developing of people that were either severely visually impaired or actually blind and had an NDE. But let's give an example of that. Marta shared her NDE, and this is a portion of the narrative. Marta was a 5-year-old girl, and parents, don't ever let your kids go out in a lake if they're blind. Here's what can happen. Marta's own words, by the way. I slowly breathed in the water and immediately lost consciousness. A beautiful woman dressed in bright white light pulled me out and, looking into my eyes, asked me what I wanted. I was completely satisfied and could think of nothing until it occurred to me to take a trip around the lake. I did so and saw a detail I would have never seen in real life. I could go anywhere, even to the tops of trees, by simply intending to do so. I was legally blind, and for the first time, I saw leaves on trees, birds' feathers, birds' eyes, details on telephone poles, and in people's backyards that was far more acute than 20/20 vision. Things we take for granted, birds' feathers, birds' eyes, telephone poles, fascinating if you've never seen it before in your life, as was true for Marta during her near-death experience at the age of 5.
Well, the people that I've talked with who have described themselves as skeptics, as agnostics, or as atheists often have difficulty using religious terms afterward, but they know what they've experienced, and the term, which is almost a code word in a certain sense for this, is the light. They don't have any difficulty talking about the light, but they might have difficulty talking about God or more obviously religious terms. But if you look at the way they describe the experience, and if you look at the kinds of changes they report in their life, and their opening to spiritual worldviews, you can see that their previous skepticism or agnosticism or even atheism has been eroded to such an extent that it virtually dissolves, and they become very spiritually oriented people too.
Okay, here's what the skeptics think we do. This right here is a fake near-death kit, and there's your light, and there's your tongue. Okay, I have great news. We don't do our NDE research this way. I don't think anybody else does either, but I think the skeptics believe that we do, so there you go. Moving on rapidly.
Then I was back in my hospital bed. And I pushed my nurse's button and said, I want to know what drugs I'm getting. Because I want more of those. And what I was told then, and indeed after the fact, I went back and I've gone through all my medical records, and I wasn't getting anything. I wasn't getting anything other than antibiotics, and early on I'd been giving steroids. And so I wasn't receiving any drug that would create a hallucination.
Some of the main ones, and this has been found in a number of different studies that have been done in at least 4 different countries in the world, are a sense of a greater appreciation for life and for nature, a sense of greater feelings of self-worth. One of the most pronounced effects has to do with feelings about other people. There's a much heightened compassion and caring and concern for other people, a greater love for other people. People that have near-death experiences become less materialistic. They become less interested in impressing others or, being successful in conventional terms. They're much more spiritually oriented. They're not more religious, interestingly enough, but they say that they're much more spiritually oriented, and many of them seem to develop or awaken through this experience unusual psychic gifts that they say either were not present before or have developed much more to a much greater extent than had been the case prior to their near-death experience.
I, like the thousands of near-death experiencers that I've investigated, all have come to that same conclusion. We're literally spiritual beings having an earthly existence at this time. When we die, and we all will, then we're going to return to our real home, that spiritual home, which is so often, and I think aptly called heaven. And that is going to be an absolutely wonderful existence for each and every one of us.
So I straddled him. I got in behind him, and I had him sitting straight up. He was agonal, and his breathing was very labored and very short. He could not get air. So he felt better if I held him up very straight. And I had my fingertips on his shoulders. And he patted me. And he said, Becky, do you see them? And I said, no. But tell me what you're seeing, because I'd had too many people tell me. He said, sweetheart, the room is full of angels now. He said, they're all over. They're over here on this side, and they're over here on this side. He said, they're all over. He said, Annie, I have to go. I love you. I'll see you again. And he held up his right arm, and he said, my Lord. And he fell back against me on my chest. This man was on no pain medicine. It was his heart and his lungs that were damaged from chemo and radiation in the 70s, which was caustic, even more so than now. That's what he was dying from. Was he hallucinating? Not in my books. I believe that man. He gave me another new hope that made me understand how indeed holy that ground is when we are with those loved ones that are transitioning and that veil is parted.
So I prayed he'd have this deathbed vision. And so the next morning he's sitting up in the bed and he's smiling and he's going like this across the hospital ceiling. And I said, oh, is everything all right? And he goes, he had a hard time. He had a hard time talking, so it was monosyllabic, and took a while to get all of this out, but occasionally there would be blurts of sentences, and I figured out what he was saying. He said, "Can you do something about that?" And I said, "What, you mean the lights?" He said, "No." The curtains? You want me to pull the curtain? No. That. And he went the whole thing. He said, "You can't see that?" And I knew then that he was having a vision. And I said, "So that, tell me what you see." "You don't see it? It's real. It's real." I said, "Honey, I know it's real, but it's meant for you to see." And he started crying. And I said, "So what do you see?" And he kept asking, "It's real. Don't you see it?" You know, he said that at least 20 times. And I said, "So what do you see?" And he said, "White feathers, people, white music." And I said, "Angels?" "Yeah, angels." "They singing?" "No." "Music?" "They playing musical instruments?" "Yes." "Are they saying anything to you? Do they want you to come over and visit them or go over there?" And they said, "No." And I kind of knew then we had a little bit more time. And I said, "Did you see anything else?" And he said, "Mountains. A whole range of mountains." And I knew that's a spiritual home. So I got him home. We went to, he was in home hospice, and he was still fighting it and still fighting it. And when it was clear he was going to pass, he was looking up again. And I knew I said, "Are you seeing your mountains again?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Do you think God is calling you home?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Do you want to go home?" And he said, "Yes." And an hour later, he went into coma. He never revived. So the next day, he was gone. But I told him it was okay. He could go. I was holding my own grief back, you know. So even though it's a beautiful thing, I'm glad, you know, I still grieve. And so then I work with people who've had near-death experiences, and they know you're told it's your time, it's your time. And it's not your time, go back, you need to go back. So if it's not your time, that means there's a time. And I still had a hard time accepting it because he fought so hard to stay alive.
I'm no guru, you know, I don't have any special knowledge. I'm just a regular dude that, like you, I go to Tupperware parties and you know, all that, but something clearly out of the norm happened to me, and it was absolutely profound.
I was in absolute awe. The way I describe it is, I felt exactly like myself, but in spirit form, and kind of above the surgeon. So I was looking down at them as they were working on me, and I was amazed at how much blood there was. That was my first thought. It looked like something from the Civil War. It just looked gruesome, and I remember thinking, is there something wrong? Should there be this much blood? And yet, at the same time, being an agnostic going into surgery, I was thrilled. I knew this consciousness to be something that survives death. I knew that I felt smarter, clearer, more intense outside of body, and then the most amazing thing happened. There were these very large beings. I didn't call them angels at first. I didn't know what they were. They were light beings about 9 feet tall, 8, 9 feet tall. But immediately I was stunned. I knew that they were intelligent and powerful and there to calm me down. So when they sent this light into my spirit form, I calmed down, I felt at ease. I knew that this spirit form is more important than the body that I was observing on the table. And they told me, though, that I would walk, I would be fine, everything would be okay, and they were almost playful. They spoke with telepathy. These words came right at me, and the words were, "Watch this." And when they said this, they sent beams of light through the backs of the doctors, through their hands, and my whole spine and my whole body lit up with this light. And I knew this light to be healing, intelligence, communication, and that they were assisting the doctors. But what amazed me was that angels worked through the surgeons. And I had enough of an awareness or a knowing to realize that the 2 surgeons didn't know this. And I realized it, and I thought, I want to take that with me. Maybe angels can work through me. Maybe these beings can work through all of us. Maybe they do, and we're not aware of it. So that was really my first lesson in the near-death experience.
That when I get out to the other end, there is, as if there are words to describe that this is even more amazing than what I already described, there is pure light. Pure light, love, truth, grace, peace, all consciousness, all knowingness. And having left the body way behind, and even the mind, the spirit starts to experience complete oneness with all that ever was, ever will be, and all that is, and complete understanding of all of it. Imagine such consciousness.
But remember, everything I say happens in timelessness, so there's no order of events for me, and there's no language to communicate it. But I touched this thing with my being, and I felt it was living. It was like the living God was in it. And as I did that, I heard my name called from deep inside of me. And I knew instantaneously that I was in the presence of God, but not God like I'd ever conceived of before. And it was a voice, but it had no gender, and it had no sound, and it had no language, but it communicated to me directly in the depth of my being. And when my name was called, I knew that God was absolutely present to me, next to me, but I could see everything but not God. And the voice called my name, and it was the name of my creation. It was the name given to me to make me exist. It wasn't just Peter, it was the ground of my being, as Paul Tillich said. The ground and the essence of my being.
And now I'm in front of the light. And the light is so warm and so glowing and so forgiving. And the light had no judgment. There was no condemnation. There was no blaming, no shame. There was nothing but love and acceptance. And the light was viewing me. The light knew everything that I ever thought, did, or will do. It knew everything. And the light welcomed me. And the light said, "Andy, don't be afraid." And I was impressed. I mean, the light knew me and called me by my name. Called me Andy. Oh, that's pretty good. And then the light said, "Andy, I love you." And then the light said, "Andy, we love you." Now, when the light said, "Andy, we love you," I looked in back of the light. And the light was a huge, giant form that I've never seen on earth, and I cannot describe. But I recognize it, and I can see it right now in my mind's eye. And as the light said to me, "Andy, we love you," in back of the light were billions and billions and billions of other lights. And all of them knew me. And they all said in a giant chorus, "Welcome home, Andy." And I said out loud, I'm home. At last I'm home.
A lot of experiencers talk about love, about this being a place of love. And I've tried to think of adjectives to describe this, the intensity of this love, you know, unconditional, pure, powerful. The only one that I can think of that works is infinite. It was infinite. It helps me to close my eyes sometimes, so forgive me, but I can go right there. It was infinite love. If you can imagine your baby that you loved, imagine like the most intense feeling of love you've ever had, or your mother or your dog, whatever it is. Imagine that, infinite, no end, so powerful and so absorbing, wave after wave after wave of cleansing white love washing over me. And I was the light. It was so beautiful. It was so beautiful.
As I felt the light, and it pulsed, and it was alive, and it was the most delicious feeling of love I've ever experienced. And it had such an attraction that it just pulled me through, and I went through this tunnel. And it got stronger, and this feeling of being enveloped in this love got stronger and stronger every second.
And it was such an intense experience because it was as though many of you have had the experience of having a little baby and just pouring your love into that baby and everything you are and all of your hopes and dreams and everything you are. And in this situation, I was that baby. And Christ was just filling me, pouring his love into me. And it was remarkable.
And so the love felt like I was the last newborn child to be born that's ever lived or ever will live again in the entire history of the universe, being hugged, loved, cradled, and cherished by every mother that had ever lived before that. Imagine what that must be like. You mothers in here know what that felt like when you held your first baby for the first time. Imagine on the scale I just told you, and then realize that is nowhere near good enough to explain what happened. That is, it was trillions and trillions of times infinitely more special than that. And I had no idea that I was that loved. And I know it's the same for each and every one of you. That's the unconditional love that was flooding through me. Just, and if a light, I know this, that God was a being of light, pure consciousness. I don't know how to explain it all. I was just there trying to understand the power of everything that was going on. But if a being of light could do backflips with extreme joy and saying, wahoo, yes, he's home, let's have a party, that God was thrilled to see me again. Absolutely mind-bogglingly thrilled that I was there again. And it's going to be the same way for you when you go home. Speaking of home, I knew I was home. There was this energetic information of feeling like I was home. Like I had never had anywhere here or ever will. It was my source of origin, my point of creation. I knew I was in the presence of my Creator. I knew I am far more special than I had. I had no idea that, and we're all that way. It's the same for everybody.
And after that, I just felt him. I didn't see his face. I didn't see his figure, his shadow, or anything like that. But I felt him get on a knee and give me a hug. And it was like the biggest, I felt real arms around me. And I was wondering, can I just go with you now? Like, I don't really want to go back where I was. I felt so much love. And I said, well, let me get perfect. I don't deserve to be in your presence right now. Let me go back and live, get perfect, and come back. He's saying, no, I love you how you are now. So I ended up seeing a projection screen that popped up, and I can see it right now. It had a picture, and it was like a video of a girl, like a prostitute, walking by. And then there was another guy with a briefcase and a suit, and he was walking by. And then there was a stoner guy with a skateboard walking by. He says, I love all of them the same. Then I also seen another guy. It looked like he was walking out of a bank, and he was dragging his son by his neck. He had a hold of his neck, and he was just dragging him because he was angry. And then the next thing that the source said was, I don't like that. It wasn't in a judging kind of way. It was just more like, I don't like that.
I then became aware of a bright, heavenly being. I felt as if I was in the presence of God. This being of light, this being had light radiating from him, and he embraced me. And when he embraced me, I could feel the most powerful love. It's the greatest love that there is in the universe. There's no greater love. I mean, it was absolutely total, real, great, engulfing love.
You're precious. The peace that I experienced on the other side is profound peace. I know what holiness feels like. I felt that. That's not just a word. It's a real experience that you will have again when you go home.
And I kept going and kept going and kept going. And the closer I got, the more intense the feeling of love that was possessing me. It was pushing in on me. It was almost suffocating me. It was so tight. And when I got to the light, the love was so incredible. The acceptance, the forgiveness. There was pure knowledge. I knew everything, and I knew everything was going to be okay.
And at some point, this incredible knowing, 100%, that this pinpoint of light somehow was God, the force that created everything, and me, and everyone, and everything that ever existed and will ever exist. And it felt like this was my father also, and like I was a child. And so at that point, I couldn't wait to get back or get to this as fast as I could. I felt like I was going home. I mean, the home of everything, too. And so I just started zooming really fast, and faster, and getting closer. And this pinpoint of light then became a big ball of incredibly bright energy, of light. And I just crashed right into it at the end and became one with this big ball of loving light energy. It was really comprised of the most incredible feeling of love you could ever possibly imagine. Just indescribable, the enormity of this feeling of love, unconditional love, and at the same time just bliss and joy, and I get really tingly feeling all over whenever I think of this. It's just so beautiful. And just ecstasy, just beyond anything you can imagine here on earth. It's way beyond that. And so I became full, so full of it. And when I felt like there was no room for any more, we started to pull apart a little bit and be separate. And it really strongly felt like this is my father and I'm a child. And then I was just full of questions. Every question I ever had was answered. It was asked and I received the answers to all questions I have ever had. But I was not allowed to bring back the information. That's okay. I still brought back lots of great stuff.
The next thing that happened is he said, well, he says, do you have any more questions before you leave? I said, I said, you know, I got to think about this. And I thought, I was thinking really hard, what am I going to ask God? Couldn't think of anything. I wanted to be really smart enough to ask him something very pertinent. And so I said, well, I'm going to have to revert to an old cliche. What's the meaning of life? And he starts laughing again. I said, what's so funny now? And he says, well, I don't know why, but a lot of people ask me that question. And it's really real simple. But I tell you what, when you come back, we'll sit down. You can ask me all the questions that you ever will have. I'll answer them for you. So I said, okay. He says, okay, it's time for you to go back. And I turned around. I'm sorry, but he put his arms around me. He put his arms around me. And it was a feeling that I can't explain. It was unconditional love, but it was words. I can't tell you the words. And I'm sorry, but I always act like this because I can feel it again. So, it changed my life.
Death is a beginning, Ken. It's beautiful. There's the light. It's love. It's more beautiful. It's, if you really love somebody, you've got to be happy for where they're going. It's an adventure, and they're not alone. See, we're afraid of somebody being alone, but they're not alone. They aren't.
And not only not alone, but it seems like they're surrounded by this sort of atmosphere of love that it's very difficult to leave once you encounter it, isn't it?
It's beautiful. It is just as though, you know, you're being held in a cradle of love and just being carried through the most beautiful, magical story God could ever create. And it's, I just can't explain it. It's marvelous.
Being in the light was being in unconditional love. Unconditional love means unconditional forgiveness. Unconditional forgiveness causes you to smile forever.
One woman described this to me by saying, in this experience, at this point, you are not the wife of your husband, you are not the mother of your children, you are not the child of your parents, you are totally and completely you.
And I could see that the earth was essentially one, and that we as human beings have a unique creative and spiritual responsibility for the state of the earth, because really by the state of our hearts we can create around us in our environment effects. And I could see that nothing existed for an instant without purpose. Nothing existed alone. No thought went unnoticed. The intention of no heart went without impact upon every molecule in existence, let alone you can imagine the impact of one heart upon another, even of people who had no connection or way of knowing one another. You could see that the earth was one, and that we, as the human body, were one.
And I was so in love with the being of light that I and everyone else just melted back into this primal oneness. And it was just perfect. It was like the essence or the quintessence of everything that ever will exist before in the next cycle of creation was there. And I believe that we were all there, and we were all one. And I found myself coming out of this unity as a drop in this cosmic ocean and saying, oh, I remembered that I had been Beverly, but here I was, one with God and one with all things. And it was like a drop of water in the ocean. I was separate, and yet I was part of that ocean, the cosmic ocean of God and of all creation.
That's what I felt like. I felt like I was sugar daddy. And I felt like I was sugar. And I was stirred into this infinite bowl of light water. And although I was still Andy, I remember being Andy. Although I was still Andy, I was now the light. And every other piece of the light there was the light. And it was fantastic. And it was so fun because the light is really very humorous. It's a fun place to be. It's kind of like McDonald's on steroids. It's a fun place.
I then was taken to an area where it was shown to me the creation of the world. And this was shown in a way as if a giant tablet appeared in space and all the history of the world unfolded in me rapidly, yet I understood everything and I was part of all things that had happened somehow. I was connected to this and I could understand it. I could understand so many things so rapidly and completely that there is no way to explain this to anybody.
And the light welcomed me. The light absorbed me into the light. So I was part of the light. And once I was in the light, I knew everything the light knew. I knew all about the universe. I knew everything about flowers, about plants, about asteroids, about suns, about novas, everything. I didn't have a question for the light. Why? Because I knew all the answers. I had nothing to ask.
I had this feeling of incredible clarity where suddenly everything made sense. And I understood. I understood why I had the cancer. I understood how everything in my life had led me to that point in time where I was lying there dying on that hospital bed. I understood also that we are amazing, magnificent, powerful beings, because I felt my energy, my essence was so huge and powerful and amazing, powerful beyond my imagination, beyond anything I could ever have known before. And I realized that I had never known this. It was the first time that I knew this. And then I realized that now that I knew what I knew, if I go back into my body, my cancer was going to heal. And it was at that moment that my father impressed upon me, now that you know the truth, go back and live your life fearlessly.
True learning happens in the body. And this is a big deal to me personally because so much of my life was about wanting to escape the body and wanting that for other people. And I also grew up hearing, you know, when you die, you get to, you know, take off that glove and you get to, you know, be free. And so I kind of thought like here is the more negative, there the more positive. And with this understanding in this place that the body is in a way there, as hard as it is to see and understand, that true learning happens within the body, because when we are in experience in this form, there's something that evolves within us, that can evolve within us at soul level, that makes the body an important part of the whole, that it, you know, that it isn't one's good and one's bad, but that the two work together in an important way. So that was very healing for me personally, to come to a better understanding of the body.
And there before me was the living presence of the being of light. And this being was all-knowing. It knew everything that was going to happen and will happen, and the reasons behind them. And it was, there was a perfect justice, and it also contained all things that ever were or will be. And it was loving me. It was just pouring out this unconditional love at me. And I thought, well, this isn't the guy on the top of the Sistine Chapel. I had this, image of what God would be like, but I figured this has to be God because this is beyond words and perfect in every possible sense. And it just also didn't make sense to me because the world that I had left behind, we were at war in Vietnam, and I was very angry about the war and about all the suffering that goes on this planet, and the Holocaust, which I had learned about, and we were learning more at the point in 1970. We were learning how horrible it had been. And so what happened was, in a sense, the love kept coming to me, but I just couldn't receive it at that time. And I got to ask all my big whys. I got to ask all of the things that I had ever wondered about. And those were the top 3 things that struck me that I had spent a lot of time thinking about, and in my justification for not believing in God. and what happened is all of my thoughts just went out telepathically, and the answers, the perfect answers, came back. It wasn't the way like we talk, it was like the entire answer and all of its ramifications instantly came into my head. And the only thing I remember, I don't remember the details, this was specifics of the answers, but I knew that I had known these things before. And I thought, oh, of course, how could I ever have forgotten? And so what happened is, after a while, I ran out of questions because I got it. I got the whole picture, the perfect knowledge that is present in the mind of God or everywhere, and I understood it.
The light itself was composed of, if I recall correctly, it's as if it was the higher self of everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I remember this particular man, and he had a very unusual experience because when he went into the light, he had a question, and he said, what are you really? What is this? What are you? And he said that he was not just enabled to enter into the light, but he passed through the light. And when he could, as it were, look back on the light, he saw it was almost like a constellation of human souls. That it was everybody's higher self, as you were describing. And again, that had a tremendous effect on this particular individual. But his experience went deeper, deeper than most. And in one chapter, I know the one that you're referring to, in Lessons from the Light, I present some cases like his of the deepest and the most complex near-death experiences that I've discovered in the course of my research. And in all of these, although I don't have many of them, as with this man, people go into and then through the light, and they seem to go almost as if on a journey through the universe, and they get to a second light. They get to something that seems to be the primordial light, or the light of creation, or the light of God. I don't even know what terms are adequate to describe it. This man was one of those who had something more like the full near-death experience, although obviously he never died, but he penetrated further than most people ever have an opportunity to do. And so many people say, even when they enter into the experience of the light, I was home. One man said, this is where I always was and always will be, and my life on earth was just a brief instant. So it's like in this brief instant that we call life, of course, which seems to expand and seems to be the totality of it. I mean, that's maybe all that we are aware of, but when we have the near-death experience, we realize this life is just a flicker, and where we really are and where we truly have our being is in that primordial light, and there we are truly all one. We are truly all one anyway, but we have the realization that we are one. We know it. It's not just an intellectual conviction.
The feeling that I had was that I was home. This is where I came from. And that part of this remembering that I had in my NDE was that I had come back to where I came from. So we went on this tour, and everything was just radiant and alive. There's no dead matter. Every star, every light that we see in the sky, it is a being, is alive.
And I was running about just joyfully being home. I knew it was home. I mean, it felt so familiar, so welcoming, so embracing. It felt like home. People say heaven, whatever word you want to put on it. The only word I could place was this was home. And I was running about joyfully, and I also got the message that I wasn't there to stay.
I asked that God's will be done, whatever that meant. And that's what I mean when I say it was the first time I really meant it. And at that moment, everything changed. I was immediately overcome with a very physical and real sensation of being held and comforted and reassured that everything was fine. My husband would be fine, my young children would be fine, and it was that word fine, not great, but fine. They would be fine regardless of whether I lived or died. So I rose up and out of the river, and I was immediately greeted by a group of somethings. People, spirits, beings. I'm never quite sure what name to give them because those words mean different things to different people, but they were people I had known forever, and I knew that they had known me for as long as I had existed. And they were so absolutely overjoyed to see me and welcome me and greet me, and I knew that they were there to guide me. I knew they were there to protect me. And I just couldn't believe it. I was absolutely overcome with a sense of being home, which again is it's so much fun to say that in a group of people who get it. I mean, I was finally home, and I was going to sleep in my own bed, and it was great. And I was surprised by that, because again, in my experience, I was still me. I was still my personality, my cynical self, really. And I was thinking, this is nuts. But I was really surprised by that sense of being home, and I was really surprised by my ability to look back at the river and see what was going on. And of course, there was this shift in time dimension. I don't know what the right words are to describe that, but of course, time and dimension really lost all meaning. And so I was able to be celebrating with these people and simultaneously watch the guys pull my body to the shore and start CPR. And I recognized my body as mine. I recognized it as my life, that it represented my husband, my 4 young children. And I was really surprised by the fact that I wasn't going back. And I was not a person who was trying to escape something. I had a great life. I still have a great life. I had a great job. I had a husband that not only loved me, but I loved dearly. And I had 4 young children that I loved more than I could ever imagine loving something on earth. I had a great life, and I had every reason to come back. But I had no intention of coming back. Now keep in mind, I mean, people have oftentimes asked me, well, didn't you feel guilty? And you know, I like to say, keep in mind that I had already been reassured by Christ that they would be fine. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But I was really surprised by that. So you know, I was on this threshold, and we're having a great time. And then, of course, the people, these angels, spirits, guides, whatever you want to call them, then told me that it wasn't my time, that I had more work to do on earth, and that I had to go back to this body that I'd already said goodbye to. And so I did what I thought was reasonable. I said, I'm good. No, you know, everything's fine. I'm not going back. I'm here. I lost that argument. I'm a doctor, not a lawyer. So I was very sad to then be taken back down this path.
This other light enveloped me. And this was a light that near-death experiences later, I didn't know anything about near-death experiences at the time, but when they started talking about the light, I started crying, you know, because, oh my God, other people have experienced this light. Everything disappeared. It was like I had no body and there was a separation, there was a sense of self in it, but I felt like I was in a warm bath of love, pure, unconditional love. And it was warm, it was welcoming. All my worries, all my fears, all my stress were gone. It was pure bliss. And even though it was all light, it wasn't I was seeing anybody or anything, I felt it was home. And I wanted to stay there forever. I said, oh my God, this is love. And I was thinking, you know, I want to stay in this light forever. I just bask in this wonder. And slowly it kind of dissipated, went away. And I'm in my bedroom in this state of awe. I was just in the state of amazing awe, and it was still lit up. And I turned to my side and I see white robes standing next to my bed. And then I looked up. Holy moly, that's Jesus. And he was looking at me with intense blue eyes that I've never seen anybody with with those blue eyes. And he said to me one sentence, and that was, but he didn't move his lips. I heard his voice, male's voice, in my head, or wherever I just heard it. Don't waste your life thinking you're not loved. And when he said the word your life, I felt this. It was palpable how precious my life was. And not just how precious my life was, but how precious everybody's life was, including that kid in Africa.